welcome back to my channel, and welcome to the first video in the series that is definitely going to be the death of me. I started this out innocently enough, thinking I was just gonna kind of slap down, handwrite, kind of a real simple, straightforward, easy timeline, and then at about, 1.5, handwritten pages, I said, screw this, and I went to my computer and started typing things out because I realized in order to do this sort of topic any kind of justice, I was going to have to put a lot more effort in than I initially had invested in the project. So a whole heck of a lot more research and a whole heck of a lot more pages later, we are here ready to film the first video. I was gonna have it be all one, but like I said, y'all would have known on Twitter and Snapchat that I have been delving deep into the depths of everything so that I can try to get as much pertinent and real information as possible, because I don't want this just to be a let's just sit down here and rehash all the things we already knew. I wanted to potentially bring some different perspectives and some different side points to light that maybe we hadn't really discussed in this sort of way. And that is going to be my video series, Dissecting Jeffree Star. This is not a video entitled The Fall of, The End of, or anything like that. This is more, how shall we say, of a retrospective view of Jeffree since sort of being in the limelight, going on to all through everything that's happened up till now. If you are looking for just sort of a sit down, quickly go through things, this is not the video for you. This is a deep dive. Also, if you're coming to this video for me to sit here and absolutely crap on Jeffree Star, then this isn't the video for you either. I am trying to stay as subjective as I possibly can. This is a video being created by someone who, for a very long period of time, had been a fan of Jeffree Star, not just of his cosmetics, but who he was before he hit the beauty industry, before he was fancy YouTube business owner person. And I hope that that might help me kind of have maybe a different edge to this narrative, because I feel like a lot of people who do a lot of the videos that are talking about Jeffree and what he's done and what's gone on are coming from a place of never liking him, kind of just, very new blood to the situation, I feel. I would also like to preface this video with letting you all know that this is most definitely fairly scripted. What started as an outline turned into a whole freaking essay. I mean, my computer has not been able to believe the type of things that I've been Googling recently for doing my research-based videos. It's like, are you okay? So if it at times does seem scripted, that's because it is. And because there are certain points that I have written down that I want to say them as they have written down. I did not want to stream of consciousness this. I wanted it to be a video that had structure, that had information, that had all sorts of things. I'm probably going to try my hardest to insert pictures depending on what I'm talking about. I feel we might as well go balls to the wall with this thing. If I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. So with that being said, let's just get on right into this. We are going to be firstly discussing the early years. Unbeknownst to some people in the beauty community who are aware of Jeffree Star as the famous YouTuber and the business owner of Jeffree Star Cosmetics, may not recall a time before his beauty debut when he had much more humble beginning. Let's go back to 2003, a much earlier year, potentially a simpler time, though still suffering from the throes of the late 90s. Jeffree Star was on MySpace, that age-old wonderful place that has now been gone, and we miss it amidst the days of the Mark Zuckerberg Facebook era. Jeffree made a name for himself in the scene, definitely by part of his distinctive look and the way he chose to self-express himself. He had an exceptionally striking image that was very alternative, very out there, not necessarily something that we saw in the mainstream. And it was very telling that at this time, he was sort of one of the, how shall we say, pioneers, godfathers, one of the top reigning people who you would put as like, this is someone who represents this era. And he was that for sort of the scene and emo and kind of that like cutesy killer aesthetic. He was known for his shock value appearance, relying strongly on the imagery of hot pink Hello Kitty against darker themed elements like razor blades and other weaponry. His particular image thrived since emo and scene culture were making their headway across teen and young adult alternative subcultures. He was sort of like the unofficial spokesperson for that style. So, this was 2003. He was 18. I was 13. I sort of sit here and use our ages as kind of a reference because I think, oh wow, you know, he wasn't that much older than me. And I feel like one thing, it is also important to remember his age in this and the fact that he is 18, therefore the brain ain't fully developed yet. Although there would be some who says the brain ain't fully developed right now. Personally, as someone who went through an exceptionally turbulent, rebellious period, I was very attracted to the in-your-face visuals of Jeffree's look. It was the exact opposite of what I was sort of brought up to be. Also, without getting into too much detail, as someone who spent a lot of time wallowing in and glorifying my mental dysfunction, I was drawn to subject material in his art, style, and music. Was it wholesome? No. Was it still a significant part of my musical and personal journey? Yes. I vividly remember and recall getting ready with my best friend at the time. We had his music blasting, and we were doing makeup and crazy eyeliner and looking awful in foundation that was too light for us, getting ready to head on down to Warped Tour to see Jeffree Star perform. And in terms of me saying hearing him perform, this is in term to his music. He released his first, well, I don't know if it's first, but like the big album that really set him on the map of alternative kind of underground synth pop situation was his Beauty Killer album, which was released in September of 2009. So I was 19 and that would have made him 24. Now it's important to note that at this point, Jeffree had really established his image. He was a little bit kind of all over the place. Who he is now is very much, I would say, a more refined version of what he was, because back in the day he was wearing like black booty shorts, fishnets, and like 8-inch platforms, carrying a Louis Vuitton bag. You know, he's kind of taken a lot of those core elements and really just sort of, like I said, refine them into what he looks like today. And not only had he established his image, he had also established in a way his character, who he was, the sort of vibes that he gave off as a human being. I remember very vividly, once again, I believe the first time I ever heard of him, I was in I was in a store and they had a music magazine and I was flipping through it and it was talking about his Beauty Killer album. And the photo set for it was, I think, him and bandmates, and it ended up him like getting them all with a shovel and then putting them in the back of a trunk. That's always been the vibe that he's given off in his artistic whatevers. And also, when it comes to his artistic whatevers, I really don't like it when people kind of go back in and find out, they're like, oh, well, he did music, and then they listen to his music and they use his music as a means to justify them saying he's a terrible person, or using it as a reason why he's a terrible person. Because I don't consider any of his music any less unsavory, any less shocking than the majority of mainstream pop music that we hear today. Also, I feel that if any female music artists today, like say insert Cardi B, if she were to come out with a makeup line, everyone would be like, yes, it's empowering, get it, queen. Whereas you have Jeffree, who has basically the same level of musical content, but we're allowed to use that as a means for him being a terrible person because of the type of music he makes. His content in that sense really has little next to nothing about who he is, because if it really did, we would be applying that logic to every single musical artist. And in that sense, the majority of top 10 and top Billboard whatevers, they'd all be terrible people if we were just judging them on that. So I really don't like it when people kind of take that and pull it and thrust it into this current narrative when it really doesn't have anything to do with it. But as I was saying, he had an established image, and his image was not Mr. Soft, Sweet, ice cream, nice person Jeffree. It was abrasive. It was rude. It was crude. It was nasty. He never came onto the scene either in the music industry or when he didn't come into the beauty industry going, yes, I am philanthropist Jeffree Star. You know, he was straightforward, he told it like it was, and he had a loud mouth. I had absolutely no illusions about who he was going to be in his YouTube beauty career because it had already been established. It was clearly ingrained into who he was. And I also remember Jeffree pre-beauty community. I remember when his dream of a makeup line was just that. It was a dream. He talked about it quite a while, saying that it was his dream to really, you know, especially start out in creating lipsticks. I remember I think he referenced Nikki Lipstick, who is one of the founders of Melt Cosmetics, who was also one of Rihanna's makeup artists. And they started out, not Nikki Lipstick, I will have to find it and I will leave it down below. But they started off with their lipsticks, and I remember him being like, you know, well, this happened and this was such a good thing. That gives me really good vibes and positivity and good hope for the brand that I'm wanting to come out with. And come out with it, he did. Honestly, it feels like it's been around a lot longer than it has. The majority of the stuff I'm talking about, every time I would research it and get my timeline right, I'd be like, it was only that long ago? It's felt like so much more time has passed. I remember so vividly, I love that phrase. I remember so vividly finding one of his branded t-shirts at a thrift store because I wasn't allowed to go into a Hot Topic store before I was 17. And by then, his music career had taken a back seat for various reasons, including the launch of his makeup line, Jeffree Star Cosmetics, in 2014, which included 3 liquid lipsticks, Prom Queen, Red Rum, and I'm Royalty. Red, hot, pink, and royal purple, the 3 iconic shades that would become the horsemen to his apocalyptic entrance into the beauty community. Because after all, lipstick was relatively harmless. Once again, I remember so clearly when he launched those 3 shades. I wanted them so bad. Like 24-year-old me was pining and yearning and lusting, especially the purple one, because he came onto the scene, his cosmetics line, when really KVD was kind of the only one doing a lot of those really crazy, colorful liquid lipsticks. And your sweet little baby bat alternative loving girl was just wanting it so bad. What I mean to say is that Jeffree Star making his transition from scene queen to makeup mogul was everything my early 20s self wanted and needed. I was on this train. I was riding it to full everything. And now I would like to state that at this point in time in my life, in my existence, I was unaware of any of Jeffree's quote unquote and true wrongdoings. When I was 24, I honestly wasn't really super involved in the beauty community. Like, this was either pre my channel or right at the beginning when I started it and was like, here's a little bit of content, and then I didn't do it for like a year and a half. So I really hadn't invested my time and my energy, and I didn't have anywhere near the amount of knowledge that I do about consumerism about other companies and about the community on a whole. And sort of as kind of a, how shall we say, context for when Jeffree Star entered on the scene. Super popular products. We had Urban Decay, Vice Limited, the MAC Keepsake Collection, Becca Champagne Gold, and the Lorac Mega Pro 1. And the KVD Star-Studded Shadow Book pre-Mi Vida Loca remix. So here we were living in a pre-highlighter existence where chocolate bars, pro palettes, and naked palettes reigned supreme. I'm sure that Jeffree Star Cosmetics was a welcome bit of color bursting onto the scene. Not to mention that his arrival was endorsed by established brand owner and at the time close friend Kat Von D, who had an extremely successful brand exclusive to Sephora that was just about to hit its all-time high in quality and popularity. And at this time, Jeffree and Kat were really true best of buds. I feel like they were like both ends of the alternative spectrum. Here he was with his like super stenciled eyebrows, his pink hair, his scene image, and then we had Kat, who was this more serious sort of goth image. They went together really well and they created a very interesting aesthetic. He appeared on her show LA Ink as well as being in both of her books, showcasing pictures of him where she had done tattoo work on him, including the tattoo portrait of his dog Divine on the top of his right foot. There was quite a lot of history between them. There was a lot of growing and developing and kind of seeing each other's progress and seeing each other's successes and failures, which is probably one of the things that really contributed to them and their fallout being so massive and significant. I remember covering it when it happened before my channel had even broken 5,000 subscribers, and it is my personal opinion that Jeffree Star, still being fairly new on the scene, was part of what contributed to him not being dragged like Kat. His personal issues and past controversies had not been explored and broadcast to the beauty community platform yet. His time would come as the popularity of brand/creator callouts escalated. Due to the current climate and Jeffree's ever-rising popularity, it was easy to cast Kat as the villain when in reality they were both quite guilty of many of the same issues. But that was certainly then, and after all that, Kat decided to release her ever so famous, her ever so controversial, the iconic video calling out Jeffree Star in July of 2016. This was one of the things that would catapult Jeffree's brand into the immediate spotlight, as Kat's own company would see a decrease in popularity, support, and sales until Kat's eventual step away in 2020. So as we entered the end of 2016 and went into the beginning of 2017, we sort of had this image of Jeffree Star emerging, not necessarily unscathed, but emerging as the superior person of the conflict. 2017 started strong with the release of his second official eyeshadow palette, Androgyny, and marking my first official purchase from the site, as well as my first review. It was actually an unboxing. I will leave it down below. I look a lot different, just letting you know now. Things were going exceptionally well for Jeffree and his company, riding high and bopping along. At this point, it was pre-peak popularity, but still doing good, as I feel for the most part people were on his brand for their amazing liquid lipstick, which was used many times to dupe out brands such as Kat Von D, Anastasia Beverly Hills, as well as Lime Crime, which was still considered a controversial brand at that time. Oh, how the times would change. But I would have to say that then going into 2018 was the true ultimate beginning for Jeffree Star and his cosmetics company. In many ways, the palette that he released this year is what I would consider kind of the magnum opus of his brand. His contribution to the beauty community and to the consumers that would have the most impact. Blood Sugar. A moment in time only 2 years ago, but a moment that seems simpler almost. Before Dramageddon, before the peak of beauty community cancel culture and the Toddy Westbrook controversy, there was a brief respite as we all came together for the love of beautifully formulated red eyeshadow. I've said it once, I will say it again. Say what you will about the man. he at least knows how to formulate a bomb diggity eyeshadow. I feel that oftentimes, because of his reputation and kind of the modern interpretation, has left some of his really standout products by the wayside. It was really frustrating after people started, dropping off the whatever, and they were like, I'm never gonna go purchase from him again, which I don't purchase from him anymore, but not because of a quality standpoint. So I was kind of, I don't know, took object to people who just decided because they thought he was a terrible person, that automatically made the makeup he made awful. Because let's be real and let's be honest, when Blood Sugar was released, it shook a lot of people. And this gorgeous postmodern Renaissance pre-main squeeze palette took the internet by storm. It took a color story and truly went balls to the wall with it, curating one of the best red tone palettes on the market. And coupled with his newly developed formula, this release was really one that was just super significant for the boost in popularity of his company. And the funny thing, actually, this palette, the Blood Sugar palette, was released before kind of like I had my die-hard love of Jeffree Star cosmetics. I actually didn't buy it on the launch. I don't know if I bought it on the second or third, but at that point I was like, all right, fine, whatever, I'll buy it, I'll review it. And in all honesty, my review was kind of like take it, you can leave it. But as I've come to develop my own techniques and know what I love and enjoy when it comes to eyeshadow, I really did begin to develop a love for the shades, for the formula, for just the whole whatever of the palette. At this point, Jeffree Star Cosmetics was a fairly well-known brand and fairly respected one as well. I feel that there was sort of a mini consensus that even though Mr. Star may not have been the most wonderful of people, then that his eyeshadows and the formulation of his products were at least still good. And to a certain degree, I felt a majority of us thought that his transgressions were no different than what any other brand owner was capable of doing. He was extremely opinionated, outspoken, and called out other company owners and founders on their tacky or otherwise distasteful behaviors. He called out Huda Beauty when she released her setting powders with their baking theme, drawing pretty obvious parallels between her ad campaign and the entire aesthetic of another smaller black-owned indie brand, Beauty Bakery. This added plenty fuel to the fire to the fact that Huda had already been accused of not being an inclusive company, as well as not showing diversity on their Instagram page, making the stink of taking inspiration from Black creators hurt even more. He was someone who held people accountable and wasn't afraid to speak his mind whether it was controversial or not. And a lot of people were really drawn to his unabashed take on makeup. He was someone who not only created makeup, formulated it, he was someone who used it. He was invested in it for his everyday life. And at the time on YouTube, I feel like we were still sort of in that era of kind of cookie cutter beauty guru supremacy. You know, we had Laura Lee, we had Jaclyn Hill, we had Manny, we had all of those big names, and they were kind of all the sort of the same brand pleasing kind of situation. And so when you have someone like Jeffree who comes in and not only appeals to the more alternative crowd like me, he was also showing that he didn't care what brands thought. He didn't care if he got PR or if he got sponsorships. What mattered to him at the core was how the makeup performed. And he was someone who was very willing to buy a lot of makeups and try them out and review them to let his subscribers know if he thought they were good. And he had a fairly high reputation. Jeffree Star approved. He had high standards, not only for his own company, but for other makeup that he used on his own. And so he did have a certain appeal that most definitely aided in his sort of jump to fame amidst all of this. Because as I know, coming on this platform, you gotta be something to like, attract anyone and get any whatever. Otherwise, you just sit here on the platform for 6 years. Oh wait, that's me. So when it came down to the time of being essentially attacked by Kat Von D, it kind of inadvertently gave Jeffree an automatic moral high ground. He was the victim and had been wrongfully pummeled with unfounded accusations, and in his response video, he maintained a very level head about things, disproving her words and making Kat become the backstabbing villain in this case. Kat was unstable, her brand was wavering, she felt threatened by his growth and popularity. In Jeffree's mind, the tables had fully turned and they were on equal playing fields when it came to cosmetics. So something had to break and Kat pushed the dam first. But in that moment, Jeffree was the favorite to win, and for a while he did. Jeffree's popularity at this point was thriving, but not just as a brand owner, as a YouTube personality, as someone beyond just his cosmetics line. He wasn't just, Jared Blandino, he was truly the absolute face and the absolute image of his company, and he invested into that. Not just his time, it was an integral part of who he was. And so bringing that passion of artistry, that passion of makeup to his channel, really, I feel, was something that was akin to a breath of fresh air kind of amongst those cookie cutter beauty gurus who weren't really kind of like lashing out at brands or holding a lot of brands accountable. We had all this everything. We had the whole, is it sponsored? Is it not sponsored? Whereas Jeffree, with the way he presented his content, it was straightforward to the point. And if a brand didn't cut it, it didn't cut it. I mean, he was known for doing that one video. Was it full face of makeup from brands that hate me? And I will admit, it is a lot easier to, essentially take the piss and, talk about brands in whatever which way you want when you have the money to afford to do so. He had established a very large slice of YouTube for himself and amassed a massive amount of followers due to his colorful personality and no BS reviews. He was someone people could trust about his opinions on makeup because he loved it, wore it, and manufactured it. A triple threat who attracted friends in high places. For a while, as we all probably know, Jeffree had a few very high-collar, ballin' YouTube friends. I'm sure most of y'all are very familiar with that ever-so-original Holy Trinity. Jeffree Star, Manny MUA, Laura Lee. I didn't want to include Nikki Tutorials in the number 3 because I feel like part of why Laura, Manny, and Jeffree are the Holy Trinity is because they're drama causing. They were kind of drawn to each other's negativities, and that just kind of created the explosion that Dramageddon 1 was. While Nikki was Jeffree's friend, she wasn't ever really involved in a lot of the shenanigans that went down. He was also good friends with Nikita Dragon, with Tati Westbrook, with Gabriel Zamora, and he had his friends and they appeared, you'd see him in his Snapchats, he'd talk about on his Twitter, you'd see him at parties, at makeup launches, at his house, at their house, at fancy places. When it came for real recognition, you saw one and you thought of the other two. There was a real kind of joint at the hip connection. It was like Mean Girls and the Three Musketeers mixed into one weird beauty guru version. If you were Jeffree's friend, you were treated well. Until you weren't. Although Nikki and Jeffree have expressed that they are on cordial terms now, it was rumored at some point that their split wasn't the most amicable, and this was when Jeffree alluded to the fact that he had dirt on quite a few people within the industry, and that was why they couldn't touch him. The simple fact of the matter is that any separation from Jeffree Star was complicated and oftentimes painful. So enter Dramageddon Phase 1. Honestly, the fact that we even have a name for this particular incident is pretty telling in and of itself, kind of like how we view the what situation, what it was to the people outside looking in as it happened. In essence, it was the combustion of a friend group that for whatever reason no longer wanted to associate with one another. And it all circled around the tricky issue of past/passive something which has come to greater light proceeding after this. Now, one thing that I find interesting is about the entire situation is that the whole sort of issue, the kind of everything that kept that ball rolling, that kept adding bits of fuel to this fire, was an overall lack of innocence from any of the parties involved. I mean, the whole idea of like, let's see here, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, he who has not committed sin, may he first throw the stone, not committed any sin, by all means, come at me. And yet, the individuals wanted to distance themselves from citing superiority in a way that honestly came off as classless and immature, broadcasting their childish statement across social media. And another thing that I find kind of interesting in this situation is the way that, just short little whatever. I believe it was Manny, Nikita, Gabriel, and Laura Lee who took this picture of them all like flipping off the bird at the camera and being like, he's bitter because we're better without him. I mean, I remember posting those sorts of things onto my Facebook when I was like 17. These are grown people doing this. I understand that these people have managers, but I also understand that they may need a manager to like sift through stuff before they post it. But the thing is, it's funny because if you look at the way this one was done and the way, let's see here. Another thing that I find interesting is the similar energy between this interaction and that of Kat Von D's, sort of attempting to set a moral high ground against Jeffree, potentially gaslighting their fans from seeing their own faults. Am I digging too much into this? Probably. But no matter how much you try to make yourself better than someone else, you are ultimately not entirely unproblematic. We all have our issues, and it isn't fair or right not to hold ourselves to the same standards that we do to those we oppose. I have no idea how that is going to affect the audio. Hopefully it's not too bad. And ultimately, it simply became the battle of past mistakes. We started off and we were like, Gabriel did that one tweet where he was like, oh, to think we could stand a I wouldn't know, or like I would never type situation. Whenever you set yourself at any kind of ultimate, any kind of this person is horrendously bad because of what they've done, and you've kind of attempted to absolve yourself of any of that same activity, when kind of activity kind of comes about, you end up looking really bad. So we had Jeffree being called out for all of his issues, which are significant. But then you had Laura Lee have her past statements. We had Gabriel with his past statements. We had all those issues with Manny and all the things that he'd done that were problematic. And it kind of just became this giant pissing competition about who could either be portrayed as the worst by drama channels or who could release the worst apology. We had that apology from Laura Lee. I think Gabriel did a whole whatever. I think Jeffree did a whole whatever. I'm not entirely sure if anything was ever actually resolved besides Manny, Jeffree, and Laura and Nikita just kind of busting up and being like, we never want to talk to each other again. I mean, couldn't y'all have come to that conclusion in private? Apologies were issued, some being more sincere than others, and the question was raised of if someone could and should be forgiven for past comments and behaviors. And there was honestly a lot going on at this time within kind of the transformation of YouTube that would really kind of feed into why this was such a big thing as it was. For example, drama channels were rampant, popping up every other week, some delivering daily uploads that just broke the 10-minute mark in order to garner those sweet ad revenue mid-rolls. And there were those who waited and delivered long thought out and well-researched documentary-style tea videos that gave somewhat unbiased looks into what was happening. But to be honest, no one is truly unbiased. I say that as someone who's coming into this who's trying to come from an unbiased point of view, but there are clearly some points that I have my kind of hard stance on, and other ones where I'm a little bit more lenient, and we're all like that, and that's fine. I feel like in this whole big giant interim of kind of like the idea of cancel culture and the idea of accountability culture, it's turned into a, yes, there are things that we, obviously if you and I disagree on, it's just going to be a no for me, dog. But in other things, it's become this sort of, oh, well, you don't think the same way I do, therefore you're a bad person. I mean, I know that I am not an entirely unbiased person, and that's why I ended up stopping and not trying to honestly always comment on every single controversial, drama-ridden whatever thing that happened within the community. So amidst all of these videos of varying opinions, hypotheses, facts, and near truths, there was absolutely no shortage of creators bringing to light beauty gurus every little ugly thing they had ever done. So much so that after a few years of providing important backstory to certain situations, it got to the point that it was much less about the drama happening and more about just crapping on the creators for the sake of views. Kind of, I feel, in a way where it's like being, being brutally honest. You're being like, oh, I'm just being honest, is kind of a disguise for just being a nasty person. I feel like the whole advent of cancel culture and the whole idea of accountability culture, it just gave people kind of a opportunity. It gave them the leeway to use that as a way to just take out all their anger and frustrations and talk about the people that they hated. But because it was for accountability, it was okay, and because they were crappy people to begin with, it was okay. For me, it became sort of a very muddy mess where there was no clear good and bad. It was kind of like this whole let's expose everyone and let's talk about everyone and let's talk about absolutely everything and just sit here and discuss and hate on the people that I don't like. But it's okay because I'm holding them accountable for their bad behavior. Now, please understand that I am 110% okay with brand owners, and content creators being held responsible for their unsavory actions. Because having a platform should come with a certain amount of social responsibility. But with that being said, accountability became sort of a guise for drama channels and other content creators to just go free range and express opinions as facts about someone's personality or actions. Like I said, it became somewhat okay to just trash the larger influencers because they were all corrupt anyway, right? Well, some of them at least, and the rampant trend of cancel culture came to its full zealous head within the beauty community. I am honestly still kind of not entirely sure what started the events of the first Dramageddon. Like, this is what I was talking about. I put, Google, what was Dramageddon? What caused Dramageddon? What happened in Dramageddon? Who are the players in Dramageddon? Dramageddon timeline. I was out here in the front of the fields doing all this work and all this research and wanting to bang my head against a wall because I was talking to my mom and I'm like, Mom, we've only just reached Dramageddon 1, and I've already got way too much content to make it one video because there was just so much to unpack in this. We had a plethora of tweets get exposed, everyone expressed their mutual distaste, and after it was less of a hot topic, simply let everyone involved go their own way. And considering everything that went down, Jeffree somehow managed to leave the situation with his brand relatively unscathed. Even though he'd been outed, somehow the shady sins of those who had outed him ended up weighing worse than the things he had done, and he was able to maintain enough of his reputation and be the bigger person, as it were. This is going to be my own personal opinion thrown out here. I feel that when it comes to this is the beauty community on a whole. It's probably just people. It's probably just YouTube on a whole. But I've noticed it pretty significantly within the beauty community and even smaller creators where we do this thing, well, not everyone, they do this thing where they kind of attempt to position themselves in that moral high ground, you know? It's like, if you're a good person, you don't have to say you're a good person. If you're not you don't have to say that you aren't. You don't have to be like, oh, well, this person is, which means they're so horrible and I'm so amazing in contrast because of how awful they are. Because I feel like that's a lot of what was happening. There was just an awful lot of nothing but childish pettiness, not just in Dramageddon, but in the Kat and the Jeffree, that whole situation as well. Obviously, we don't know what really went down, what was in their heads. I'm not entirely sure I would want to know what was in their heads. But when you contrast the Kat kind of her video, where it was really just calling out all of his bad behavior and being like, he was an awful person this way, he was an awful person that way, he was an awful person this way. I find it so interesting that these people, after being friends for this person for such an extended period of time, that at one magical specific point, they decide that it's time to completely distance themselves and do it with a significant amount of fanfare. It's one thing to step away from someone, be like, you toxic, you nasty, I don't want to be around you no more. And to just step away rather than to release a whole video or do a whole bunch of tweets and kind of really try to put yourself up there. And it's happened a lot. When you have that maneuvering for the moral high ground, it makes everyone who then has done something look so awful and inferior to you. And one thing that I've noticed within the community, where it's like this level of, if you're not at this specific level, even though there are other levels that are okay to be at, if you're not at this one, you suck. And I did look and I tried to see sort of like, oh, could we find a whole thing? And I read a couple blog posts about Dramageddon. They're like, well, Jeffree started obscurely tweeting about this, and then Laura Lee tweeted about that, and then there was this and that. We don't really know. No one has come out and said, okay, Jeffree Star peed in my coffee, that's why we're not friends anymore. Or Jeffree Star specifically said this to me at this time. It was less of a specific saying this right here. I'm citing this experience as to why we're not friends anymore. More just sort of just like bringing up the old things. And that wasn't just with Jeffree. That was done with everyone. You know, one person was guilty, then it was time to find everyone guilty. And so thus ended an era of beauty gurus. Many of the power players had fallen, leaving a clean slate and open positions to be Jeffree's new best friends. Now, it is important to realize that just because famous content creators make videos together, it does not mean that they are best friends, despite what you might see on screen. We are often shown the best side of things on social media, and we have got to understand that money speaks a lot louder than feelings, which why we regularly see super popular content creators collaborating. And as such, it wasn't much of a surprise when we saw Jeffree starting to hang out with Toddy Westbrook. They were doing their makeup in a private jet. He was buying her fancy limited edition Mona Lisa Louis Vuitton bags. You know, it was a whole thing. As well as Shane Dawson, two exceptionally high-profile YouTubers. He was also producing content with James Charles at the time, despite his later claims of James's behavior, which indicates that he had issues with the young creator even at this time, despite that YouTube facade of, oh, we're creating content together, yes! But on the outside, Jeffree had managed to establish himself as a sound friend and someone who supported them emotionally as well as financially, often purchasing lavish gifts for both Tati and Shane. So it would seem that maybe a new leaf was turned. You know, we had apologies, we had all whatever, everything was brought to light, and he sort of, you know, he apologized for it. There was like, okay, all right, you know, it's done, it's happened, you know, it's a breath of fresh air, we can move on. So it would seem that a new leaf was turned for Jeffree as well as the core of the beauty community. What is important to remember is that during the first Dramageddon, while Jeffree was ousted for his past behavior, it created an ugly backlash that affected Laura, Manny, and Gabriel more than Jeffree, painting them as these fame-hungry people who had betrayed their innocent friend for clout, clicks, and notoriety. Jeffree had his issues, and people knew about them, but in this instance, they were slightly overshadowed by the avalanche of bad choices made by his previous friends. This is why, if you don't got nothing nice to say, don't say it, even though I'm sitting here talking about all this shiz. So, new friends and a fresh slate. Jeffree's brand was still riding high. The Alien palette released, something that I truly enjoyed and thought had a fantastic formula despite the absolutely awful, unnecessary packaging. All in all, it was a good addition to his growing family of cosmetic products, and a large amount of people were hanging on his lips for news of the next product release. I'm actually going to cut it there because I think I've got probably about an hour's worth of footage at this point, and want to have as few videos as I can, but I also don't want those videos to be 12 hours long each one. I really hope that this made sense, because when I'm filming this, even though I have my outline, I can never really tell if it sounds good and it flows until I edit it. And sometimes your girl has a little bit of problem going, I hope you found this informative so far. I hope this was interesting. I hope this isn't just kind of a boring rehash of everything. I really am trying to get a bit more in-depth and introspective. So I am stopping this video pre-2019. When I see you in the second one, which will hopefully be up fairly soon after this one, I'm gonna try my hardest to get them all out in about a month. So definitely let me know what you feel down below. Please, please be polite. There are all sorts of varying opinions and everything like that. I am trying very hard not to place my opinion in places where it doesn't belong, but I really need y'all to just kind of rein it in, keep it respectful, and just don't, because I understand he is such a touchy subject. You mention his name and people come out of the woodworks to be like, why did you say his name? Why did you even have that name in your brain? Why are you able to say that name? Why aren't you using his pseudonyms? Why aren't you calling him Voldemort? Why are you Yeah. So I'm trying to kind of, let's not have that. So I have a lot of faith in y'all to keep it all nice and whatever. I really hope to see you guys in the next videos of this. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting me through my inconsistent content, me trying to figure out where I am as a content creator, and for those of you who have supported me doing more in-depth videos like this, because a lot of videos like this is truly what gives me joy, where a lot of my passion is. So thank you all so much for that. Your support has been overwhelming at times, and truly something that lifts me up when I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. So thank you all so much for that. I love you, and as always, keep it real. Mwah!